Hello and welcome to my channel. I am doing a book review of Jill Duggar Dillard's book, Counting On. I think this is the 8th part of my review, so I try to keep these to about 10 minutes. Haven't always been successful. Just a bit of background with me that I've forgotten to share in the last few videos. I was raised in a fundamentalist Baptist church. My parents were not fundamentalists. Surprisingly enough, half our church was fundamentalist and then the other half was not. Some churches are not as forthcoming about it as others, or upfront about it, I guess. We're almost done. I was planning on just doing a bunch of book reviews, or I was planning on finishing out the book review this week, and then work just got a little crazy. So where we left off in the last video was that they decided to start using birth control due to Jill severely rupturing her uterus during childbirth of her youngest son. She'd always been taught that most people who are saying they stopped having children on the advice of their doctor were using it as a cop-out. But yeah, a lot of women who have tons and tons of children, back-to-back pregnancies, because their bodies are not given a rest, unfortunately they start having medical issues, and it's really difficult. It's really hard on the body. IBLP, so that was the church group that she was in, that many people call a cult. Their view was that a lot of people with small families were basically lazy. Feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, or like you couldn't cope with having more kids was no excuse. So this is interesting because in many cases where people have a ton of children, typically due to their faith that tells them, or their culture that tells them they have to have a lot of kids, there's a lot of issues that arise from that. Anywhere from, the parents get burned out, especially the mom. They can't handle it all. I mean, a lot of people get burned out with 2 kids, 3 kids, because there's just so much going on. Laundry, schoolwork, busing them from, their day-to-day activities, just everything that goes along with having children. And imagine multiplying that by 10, or, in Jill's case, 20 children with her parents. You're going to get overwhelmed. And people just have mental breakdowns, understandably, depression, a huge risk of postpartum. And then there's also abuse. People are getting frustrated, taking it out on the kids or taking it out on their other siblings. And then when, of course, there's issues like her brother with other sorts of abuse where that arises for different reasons. The parents are not able to pay attention to all the kids, so then the kids get neglected and there's just not enough time to go around, or they're not able to supervise all the children, which was in Josh's case. So things happen. From some of the kids who grew up in large families that I knew of, some of them, not everyone, but some of them ended up getting into a lot of trouble as adults or as teenagers, late teens, early 20s, because they didn't know how to cope. They didn't know how to handle things like vices. I'm not talking even substances. I'm talking about like being able to handle like how much TV you watch, how many video games you watch, how much junk food you eat, or whatever. I mean, those seem like stupid stuff, but to someone who has never been exposed to that and who has never been allowed to be like, okay, I'm going to go to bed at this time, I'm going to have this much candy, I'm going to play video games. Like they've never been allowed to do those things and to be their own adults. They're basically, the parents are very controlling and hold their hand. And then when they're an adult or they get married off, they are like suddenly free and they have no coping skills because they've never been taught them. I've unfortunately found that with a lot of people, which is very sad. And then unfortunately some of them did get into substances. I guess the other vices, the video games and stuff, that's not wild. But there were people who unfortunately got into trouble with the law, got into trouble with different substances. I cannot pronounce anything right now. It's the end of the week. So Jill was afraid that old friends might start to ask questions and notice the gap in between our kids. Gosh, this is so invasive of people to do, but they do that. What if they figure out we're using contraception? Yeah, so people have speculated that about some of Jill's siblings who only have like 2 kids. Yeah, and by the way, IBLP was led by Bill Gothard, who had no children. Wow, that we know of. But he never married. But he's giving all this advice. I mean, that's been pointed out so many times. So she talks about how living with fearful thoughts is a lot like living with hornets and garter snakes. Once they find a way in, you can block as many holes as you like, but the struggle to keep them out will require constant vigilance. That's interesting that she said garter snakes, which are not poisonous. We have them in Washington. I wouldn't want them in my house though. And then she says, when they do get in, which they will, the memory of all those previous attacks will make whatever you're facing so much worse. She said, I used to think I might not be able to handle all the kids God gave me. Was this his way of answering this? And she said she felt conflicted. She also felt somewhat relieved, but she also felt devastated, obviously, because she's been taught that she needs to have as many kids as she could. She said, there was a small part of me that appreciated the excuse not to have to go through a zillion pregnancies and deliveries. She'd watched her mom do that. She'd watched family friends do that. And then her sister-in-law, Anna. She said, with both of my boys, the first trimesters had been rough, leaving me bedridden. She says, in my world, big families were everywhere. If you didn't have one, then there's probably something wrong with your body. She said, I hated that I could still feel the involuntary recoil at the stigma. Yeah, so that's the other thing. Like, some women are taught that responsible for their own infertility, that they did something wrong and that they've sinned, or they just need to pray. Whereas the less fundamental churches will just accept that, just sometimes people just can't have children. Horrible that these women are taught and built up to believe, like, oh, you'll have higher status if you have more children, you're doing the right thing if you have more children, and then if you don't have children, you're basically sinning. And when you have these fertility issues and it's just, there's so much guilt that's heaped upon them. It's terrible. Then she talks about how she was thankful that God had led her and Derek to step away from the show when they did, and that they're able to protect their youngest son, who they thought, doctors thought might have brain damage when he was born. I will say, though, the reason why they did leave this show, sort of, but they also were kind of kicked off. They don't address it in here, but her husband made some comments about Jazz. Gosh, I don't know her last name. Jennings, is it? She was a child that was on a TLC show. She's transgender, and he made some comments about that. Some of the comments were directed at TLC and how they exploit children, which they definitely were in both the Duggar show and in Jazz's show as well. They're totally exploiting a child going through something difficult. She said she was thankful that she had time to process everything with her son, with his potential brain damage, and she was glad she didn't have to rehash an interview chair for the show multiple times. She said she had a problem with articulation because of how she was raised, which is something I also struggled with too up until a few years ago. But she said she was stumbling over her words and she was still in the midst of working through it. And she talked about strangers would critique her while she processed everything, further adding to my trauma. Yeah, there's a lot of people online. It's just cruel. Reddit is just full of a bunch of, seems like, people with the level of maturity of high schoolers. But when Jill and her sisters and these other girls who have been raised in this environment, like I said, you're not taught to be articulate, and so when they try to speak, it comes out very halted, just kind of like how I talk. I'm not very articulate. People criticize them and they say, oh, they're stupid, they're just low intelligence. I mean, you'll see stuff like that all the time. Oh, they must be of low intelligence. Oh, they were homeschooled, they're low intelligence. Blah, 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 blah. They're simpletons. This is not the case. It really makes me mad when I see that kind of thing. Because these girls, a lot of times, are abused, they're trapped, they're not able to leave their situation, they're not able to better their situation, and to have people from the outside world who have never experienced anything these girls have come in here and be like, well, I'm smarter than you because I'm on Reddit and I have an internet connection. I mean, it's so condescending. And these are the same people who are like, girl power. It's all a facade, because they'll just bash these girls when they're down and hurting. Wow, I didn't cover much here, I don't feel like. Here it is. I'm gonna end it here because I'm already at 12 minutes. Here's the book, check it out, it's great. I will link this down below. Now, if you use my link to purchase this book, I do get a small commission. I have to say that legally. I think I have like $1 in commissions, but whatever, it's fine. But yeah, you can get this on Amazon. I know some people were waiting to check it out from the library, and there was a huge waiting line. It's really good, it's really well written. She did have a ghostwriter, so pretty much everyone who writes a book has a ghostwriter unless they're a professional writer. So, but she did really great in the articulation, and she's become definitely more articulate. You can tell she's going to therapy and everything like that, and she does talk about she's gone to therapy. So she's definitely grown, and dare I say, I think she's outgrowing her husband, but I'll have to make a video on that. Anyway, until next week, thanks for watching.